A vast surge of spiritual energy spread out from the sky like a tidal wave. Countless beams of light intertwined, vaguely forming an enormous cauldron in the heavens. The cauldron loomed over the land, exuding an astonishing force. Countless gazes flickered as they stared at the radiant cauldron. Upon closer inspection, they realized it was actually an immense spirit array, with each intricate beam of light forming part of its array diagram. This spirit array seemed even stronger than the twin lotus spirit array from before. Many experts felt a slight tremor in their hearts. Their eyes on Chen took on a new look. This guy had been deliberately feigning weakness earlier. Without anyone noticing, he had merged his spirit seals into the air. Only when the array diagram was fully formed did he trigger it, instantly constructing such a formidable spirit array. It had seemed like Devil Dragon Child had driven him into a desperate situation, but who would have thought that his sorry state was merely a cover to conceal his array setup? And it had to be admitted, he hit it masterfully. Even Devil Dragon Child hadn't noticed. This young man, despite his age, possessed a depth of cunning far beyond his years. Even in the face of imminent danger, he remained composed, using Devil Dragon Child's own carelessness to secretly set up his formation. The new batch of students from Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy is quite something, murmured a green-robed man, a hint of surprise flickering in his eyes. Even he had only sensed something when Chen was on the verge of completing the array. Before that, he, too, had failed to notice how Chen had seamlessly integrated his spirit seals into the air. Clearly, this freshman named Chen had an impressive mastery of spirit arrays. Otherwise, there was no way he could have merged his spirit seals so flawlessly into the air without causing even the slightest disturbance. This spirit array is quite powerful. The green-robed man narrowed his eyes at the colossal cauldron, sensing its overwhelming might. This level of power could likely pose a genuine threat to Devil Dragon Child. Perhaps now, Devil Dragon Child would pay the price for his arrogance. High in the sky, under countless gazes, Devil Dragon Child stared coldly at the massive cauldron trapping him. His face twisted slightly with suppressed rage, making his already fearsome expression even more sinister. "I really underestimated you," he said darkly, teeth clenched in anger. He hadn't expected Chen to play him so thoroughly in front of so many people. Moments ago, he had believed himself to be in complete control. Yet, he had failed to notice when Chen had deployed the spirit array. It wasn't that he lacked the ability to sense it, he had simply been too overconfident. He never imagined Chen could pull off something like this right under his nose. And now, that massive cauldron in the sky felt like a slap to his face, fueling the fury in his heart. Chen's elegant features remained indifferent, though traces of blood still lingered on his lips. This spirit array was none other than the oneling she had given him before he left Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Though it was still classified as a 5th-grade spiritual array, its power rivaled that of a late heaven-reaching stage expert. In the past, he wouldn't have been capable of deploying such an array. But after unlocking the mind's eye, he had gained the ability to do so. Of course, setting up this array required time. If he had attempted it openly, Devil Dragon Child would have easily disrupted the process. So, he had employed an unexpected tactic, using the chaos of Devil Dragon Child's most ferocious attacks and his own seemingly desperate defense to discreetly weave the spirit seals into the air. Thus, he had now turned the tide of battle. Chen glanced at Devil Dragon Child but wasted no words. Instead, he simply sat cross-legged in midair, forming a series of hand seals. Rumble. The immense cauldron-shaped spirit array roared to life. Inside, the space itself began to tremble violently, as if it were about to boil over. "You really think this will turn the tables?" Devil Dragon Child's voice was icy as he took a step forward. A vast surge of dark gray spiritual energy exploded outward. It was clear to everyone. He wasn't taking this cauldron lightly. "You sure talk a lot," Chen said with a faint smile. As his hand seals shifted, the air inside the cauldron instantly turned crimson, as if it were about to ignite. Once the crimson hue made contact with the overwhelming spiritual energy surrounding the Devil Dragon Child, the energy began to ripple and gradually evaporate. A terrifying heat spread throughout the cauldron spirit array. Divine Cauldron Heaven Refining Array. Mu Chen's expression turned solemn as his low, cold voice emerged from his throat, slowly resonating in the air. Boom! With Mu Chen's shout, the cauldron spirit array was completely detonated. Countless onlookers saw the crimson flames take shape within the array, spreading out like a fiery sunset cloud, engulfing the devil dragon child. Such a scale left no possibility for escape. The devil dragon child's expression shifted to one of discomfort, sensing the danger from the sea of crimson flames. I don't believe that a mere 5th grade spirit array can defeat me. The devil dragon child gritted his teeth, changing his hand seals. His immense spiritual energy roared around him as it gathered and formed into a spiritual energy shield, enveloping him. On the surface of the shield, a black magic dragon swirled, emitting a powerful spiritual energy pulse. It resembled the strongest fortress defense. Boom, boom. The crimson flames continued to spread. The vast gray-black spiritual energy was quickly evaporating under the flames' advance. The area of the cauldron spirit array where the devil dragon child stood was being suppressed continuously. Bang! In just a dozen breaths, the crimson flames had burned away all the gray-black spiritual energy, and the sea of fire surged. The terrifying heat surrounding the shield caused ripples to form on its surface. Mu Chen coldly watched the devil dragon child as he tried to defend. His hand seals suddenly shifted. Screech! A sharp, clear cry pierced through the crimson flames, and suddenly, enormous firebirds formed within the blaze. They circled and flapped their fiery wings, letting out a long, skyward cry before swooping down in an overwhelming wave. They slammed into the magic dragon's spiritual energy shield. Boom, boom, boom. The low rumble of explosions echoed through the sky as the massive firebirds collided, sending shockwaves through the seemingly indestructible shield. The magic dragon on its surface roared, struggling to resist the repeated impacts. Inside the shield, the devil dragon child sat cross-legged, his face ashen. Spiritual energy continuously surged from his body to reinforce his defenses. He knew that this spiritual array was Mu Chen's final move. If he could endure it, he could easily crush Mu Chen afterward. Previously tricked by Mu Chen, the devil dragon child now longed to tear him apart. Mu Chen also noticed the devil dragon child's venomous glare. He smiled faintly and ignored it, only focusing on driving the array's power to its fullest to severely injure or even refine the devil dragon child to death. Boom, boom. With each fiery bird's relentless impact, the spiritual energy shield's ripples grew more intense. The magic dragon on its surface also began to lose its form. The surrounding crimson flames surged, and the intense heat corroded the shield, causing the devil dragon child within the protection to sweat profusely. Time passed slowly, and the spiritual energy shield grew increasingly thin. The magic dragon became even more ethereal, causing many to feel their hearts race. This spiritual array was indeed formidable, even able to suppress the devil dragon child's defense. Break for me! A cold light flashed in Mu Chen's black eyes. His hand seals shifted, and he shouted, his voice like thunder. Boom! The cauldron spirit array roared to life, and the crimson sea of flames erupted, charging toward the increasingly fragile spiritual energy shield. Crack! Under the onslaught, the spiritual energy shield finally reached its breaking point. A faint sound rang out as cracks spread across its surface. The devil dragon child's face turned pale. In the distance, Su Xian, He Yao, and others revealed expressions of wild joy. Boom! With countless eyes watching, the spiritual energy shield shattered completely, and the crimson flames surged forward, enveloping the helpless devil dragon child. Everyone saw the devil dragon child's face twist in despair as he found himself utterly trapped. The intense heat spread, instantly turning the demon dragon child's clothes to ashes, and even his skin turned bright red. The searing heat made his eyes burn with a crimson hue. As the terrifying sea of flames engulfed the demon dragon child, he spat out several mouthfuls of blood, his eyes filled with an intense and vengeful gaze. locking onto Mu Chen in the distance. The firestorm spread, swallowing him whole. At this moment, countless people felt their hearts skip a beat. Had the demon dragon child failed? The entire city fell into a deathly silence, all eyes fixed on the area where the firestorm spread, and the atmosphere in the heavens and earth seemed to freeze. The flames continued to rise. After a long while, the enormous cauldron spirit array finally began to dissipate due to the depletion of spiritual energy, and the spreading firestorm gradually faded away. Eventually, the firestorm completely faded, and the demon dragon child's figure disappeared within it. But soon, someone cried out in shock as they saw an anomaly in the sky when the last flame vanished. Mu Chen's pupils also contracted sharply, his eyes fixed on that spot. In the sky, a blood-red sphere, roughly several zhang in size, floated eerily, resembling a blood-soaked lump of flesh. The blood sphere floated in the air, exuding strands of crimson evil aura, and with every subtle pulse, it appeared as if a chilling and disturbing mass of flesh had appeared in the sky. This bizarre scene caused the faces of countless people to change, a chill rising in their hearts. This is... The man in the green robe in the great hall frowned as he stared at the scene. After a moment, he muttered, "Could it be the Dragon Demon Palace's secret technique? The Dragon Transformation Blood Art? Dragon Transformation Blood Art?" A figure behind the man in the green robe asked, puzzled. "A profound secret technique from the Dragon Demon Palace. Only disciples of very high rank are likely to cultivate it. The technique is strange and brutal. It's said that one must carve out some of their own flesh and blood, then implant the flesh of the demon dragon into their body, feeding it with their own blood. When in dire straits, they can activate the demon dragon's blood and greatly increase their strength." The man in the green robe's expression became more serious as he said, "However, this secret technique comes at a great cost. After using it, the demon dragon child will probably take half a year to recover. I didn't expect that a kid in the late heaven transformation stage would be able to push the demon dragon child to this extent. Truly unexpected," someone behind him remarked. The man in the green robe nodded slightly. This new student, Mu Chen, was indeed impressive. However, forcing the demon dragon child to this point, it was hard to say whether it was a stroke of luck or misfortune. Su Linger, He Yao, and the others also had grim expressions. Though they didn't know exactly what the blood sphere was, it was clearly bad news for them. Beside them, Shun Songxing had regained his composure, his pale face returning to a slightly more normal color. However, when he saw the wriggling blood sphere in the sky, his pupils suddenly contracted. Dragon Transformation Blood Art. Shun Songxing gritted his teeth, his bloodied hand gripping his spear tightly. Then he exhaled sharply, his expression growing more serious, ready to act again. Although he wasn't in the best condition, he knew that the situation to come might not be something Mu Chen could handle alone. The fact that Mu Chen had forced the demon dragon child to this point was also beyond his expectations. In the eerie atmosphere that enveloped the entire city, Mu Chen in the sky continued to watch the wriggling blood sphere, his expression changing constantly. He hadn't expected that even with this hidden trump card, he still couldn't defeat the demon dragon child. That divine cauldron heaven refining array was powerful enough to heavily injure a late-stage heaven-reaching expert. This guy is too tricky. Boom. As Mu Chen's expression changed, the blood sphere hovering in the distant sky suddenly trembled. Its surface wriggled, as though something was about to burst out of it. Mu Chen's eyes flashed coldly, his fingers tightening into a fist. With a roar, he unleashed a massive spiritual energy lash, slamming it into the blood sphere. Bang! A low rumble echoed, as if blood had splattered everywhere, but the blood sphere remained motionless, its pulsations growing faster. Soon, a crack began to appear, slowly spreading across its surface. Mu Chen's pupils contracted sharply. The blood sphere wriggled wildly, and with a sudden pop, a blood-red, scale-covered arm violently pierced through it. The arm was not human in shape. Its fingers were sharp, like a beast's claws. An indescribable aura of slaughter emanated from it, causing countless people to slightly change their expressions. The arm reached out and ripped the blood sphere apart, blood splattering everywhere. A blood-red figure slowly emerged from the chaos. All eyes in the sky were drawn to it, and a collective gasp spread through the crowd. The figure hovering in the sky was none other than the Devil Dragon Child. His body had grown significantly taller, and his form was now covered in blood-red scales. Behind him, a blood-red dragon tail, several zhang long, swayed violently. His hands and claws resembled those of a dragon, exuding a chilling, cold gleam. At this moment, the Devil Dragon Child looked like a ferocious killing beast. His eyes and aura were utterly terrifying. Roar! The Devil Dragon Child let out a long, shrill roar, the sound so sharp and piercing that many people's faces turned pale. The surrounding air was violently disturbed, rapidly spreading out into the distance, a breathtaking sight. Heh. After the roar, the Devil Dragon Child's crimson eyes locked onto Mu Chen in the distance. A cruel smile appeared at the corners of his lips, and he licked his blood-red tongue with a terrifying, predatory expression. Mu Chen's eyes were filled with caution. Vast spiritual energy rippled around him. From the Devil Dragon Child's current form, he sensed an extremely dangerous aura. The other party was far more terrifying than before. You forced me into this, Mu Chen. Congratulations. The Devil Dragon Child grinned wickedly, his eyes filled with murderous intent, so thick it seemed to solidify. In the next moment, he took a massive step forward, his blood-red dragon tail sweeping through the air as his figure disappeared. Mu Chen's expression changed. Dragon-shaped shadows appeared around him, and he pushed his speed to the limit, suddenly blasting backward for over 1,000 meters. Swish! However, just as his figure reappeared 1,000 meters away, the air behind him exploded. A blurred, blood-red figure appeared right behind him, and a sinister, cruel laugh carried on the wind. Mu Chen, weren't you fast? Why do you look so pathetic now? Boom! Along with the wicked laughter came the sharp sound of wind being ripped apart, the gusts so fierce they seemed capable of tearing Mu Chen's body apart. Black arcs of lightning crackled across Mu Chen's body as he raised both arms to protect himself. Bang! The blood-red, scale-covered dragon claw slammed into Mu Chen's arms with a deep, resounding thud. A surge of pain shot through him as he coughed up a mouthful of blood. His body was violently thrown backward, and the excruciating pain in his arms felt as though they had been shattered. The Devil Dragon Child's strength had reached an overwhelmingly terrifying level. Heh, don't worry. I'll break every bone in your body, piece by piece. The Devil Dragon Child's smile twisted even more grotesquely. With another flick of his dragon tail, he reappeared behind Mu Chen, his arms now glowing even more vividly with blood-red scales, as if blood were about to drip from them. Boom! He threw a punch, and the air exploded from the force. Mu Chen clenched his hand, and a black tower appeared, rapidly expanding to shield him. Clang! The Devil Dragon Child's punch landed with a loud metallic sound. Sparks flew as the black tower was sent flying. Mu Chen used this moment to rebound a distance away. You're an interesting guy. I never thought you could still fight back. The Devil Dragon Child sneered, his figure once again shooting forward like a streak of blood-red lightning. But let's see how long you can keep this up. Swish! Swish! The Devil Dragon Child's speed had reached an astonishing level. He moved like a blood-red flash of lightning, while Mu Chen had completely fallen into a disadvantage. If not for the Black Tower constantly protecting him, he would have been severely injured by the Devil Dragon Child's relentless assault. Even so, his situation was dire. Blood flowed down his body, and it was clear he couldn't last much longer. Su Xian and the others watched in horror. The gap between the two sides had clearly become insurmountable. No matter how many tricks Mu Chen had up his sleeve, he could no longer turn the tide. I'll help him. Shen Songxing gritted his teeth, disregarding his own injuries. Su Xian and the others immediately grew anxious. With Shen Songxing in his current state, he likely wouldn't be able to offer much help. Clang! In the sky, the Demon Dragon Child once again struck the Black Pagoda with a powerful punch. The Black Pagoda trembled and dimmed, eventually turning into a streak of black light that surged into Mu Chen's body. Clearly, after enduring so many of the demon dragon child's frenzied attacks, the Futu Tower had reached its limit. Hee. Do you have any more tricks up your sleeve? The demon dragon child grinned, his eyes vicious and terrifying. If not, then prepare to die. Taking a step forward, he appeared right in front of Mu Chen. His sharp, blood-red claws shot toward Mu Chen's chest with lightning speed, aiming to pierce him. Mu Chen's eyes also turned crimson as he prepared to fight the demon dragon child to the death. Clang. However, at that moment, an earth-shattering sword hum rang through the sky, followed by the sight of a river of sword energy rushing toward the demon dragon child, crashing violently into his body. Boom. The sword energy swept over the demon dragon child, sparking a shower of sparks as his body was sent flying. Wow. Countless people were stunned. They looked up and saw a young woman in a black skirt, holding a black long sword, floating in the air. Her eyes, cold as an icy lake, locked onto the demon dragon child. Behind her, a bloodied figure fell from the sky. The person's aura was weak. It was none other than Mu Gu, ranked third on the bounty ranking. Luoli defeated Mu Gu. Su Xian and the others exclaimed in surprise. Luoli had arrived just in time. In the city, some couldn't help but shout in awe. This year's freshmen from Northern Heaven's Spiritual Academy were truly impressive. First, Mu Chen had forced the demon dragon child to use his ultimate move, and now, this stunning young woman had effortlessly defeated Mu Gu, who was in the mid-stage of the heaven-reaching stage. Boom. Just as everyone was in shock, another violent surge of spiritual energy erupted from the horizon. People looked toward it, their expressions turning grim. There, Li Xintong was floating in the air, his long sword piercing Gue Xiong's throat. At the same time, Gue Xiong's massive axe struck Li Xuantong's shoulder, blood pouring out. It was a desperate life-or-death struggle. However, it was clear that in the end, Li Xintong gained the upper hand. Gue Xiong's throat was pierced. He opened his mouth, blood pouring out, his eyes filled with disbelief. He stared at Li Xintong, whose chest was still slightly rising and falling, wanting to speak, but the blood in his mouth choked him. Slowly, his body slumped and fell from the sky. Li Xintong casually removed the axe from his shoulder and stopped the bleeding with one hand. Then, with the other hand, he raised his sword and rushed toward Mu Chen. Looking at the blood covering Mu Chen's body, then at the menacing demon dragon child in the distance, he spoke softly. You've worked hard. Luoli also quickly flew over and supported Mu Chen. She looked at his blood-soaked body, her heart aching. Are you all right? Mu Chen shook his head. He looked at the demon dragon child in the distance, whose face was as cold as ice, staring at them. At this moment, except for Luoli, who was in better condition, both he and Li Xintong had sustained serious injuries. In their current state, would they be able to deal with the now much stronger demon dragon child? The demon dragon child's eyes glinted like a venomous snake as he stared at the three of them. A savage smile spread across his face, and the blood-red dragon tail behind him flicked lightly. His murderous voice echoed across the sky. These two are really useless. They can't even stop a single person. But since everyone's here, I'll take care of them all at once. In Western Desolation City, countless gazes were fixed on the confrontation in the sky. Although Mu Chen's group had the advantage in numbers, everyone could tell that the true upper hand was still held by the demon dragon child. At this point, after using some secret technique, the demon dragon child's power had clearly become even stronger. Even if Mu Chen and the others teamed up, it seemed unlikely that they could stop him now. Su Xian, He Yao, and the others realized this as well, and their expressions grew grim again. The earlier joy from seeing Luoli and Li Xintong defeat their opponents had faded considerably. In such a situation, breaking the deadlock seemed almost impossible. High in the sky, Mu Chen furrowed his brows as he gazed at the demon dragon child, whose aura was filled with murderous intent. This guy's strength has increased again. Li Xintong frowned, his expression darkening. He could clearly feel that the devil dragon child was stronger now than before. Can we still fight? Li Xintong glanced at Mu Chen's injuries and asked. Mu Chen smiled and nodded. He clenched his palm, his black eyes flickering as if deep in thought. How about you leave him to me? Luo Li said softly from the side. Mu Chen and Li Xiantong both looked surprised. Then Mu Chen furrowed his brow, and cold light seemed to flicker in his black eyes. He clenched his palms tightly, shook his head slightly, and said, I'll handle it. Are you sure? Li Xiantong asked, a bit doubtful. He knew Luo Li's background well, so her confidence in dealing with the devil dragon child didn't surprise him too much. But Mu Chen's strength, compared to Luo Li, was still somewhat lacking. It was already remarkable enough that Mu Chen had forced the devil dragon child to this point in their previous encounter. If Mu Chen pushed any further, he might pay an extremely heavy price. Luo Li's clear, bright eyes turned toward Mu Chen. Seeing his injuries, a trace of resentment rose in her heart. She understood that Mu Chen wanted to protect her, but didn't he realize that it only hurt her to watch him get beaten up like this? Did he not know that it made her feel even more heartbroken? Luo Li bit her soft red lips. Not wanting to argue with Mu Chen in front of others, she turned her face slightly, saying nothing further. But her gesture was unmistakably clear. She was angry. Li Xiantong shrugged, his heart aching a little. In his eyes, seeing the usually calm and independent Luo Li, who never let things move her, actually get angry was something to be envied. After all, only someone truly dear to her could make her feel that way. Mu Chen gazed at Luo Li's exquisite face, which resembled fine white porcelain, and couldn't help but smile. This was the first time he had seen Luo Li angry at him. He reached out and grabbed the slender, jade-like hand of the girl. She initially tried to pull away, but when she saw his injured state, her stubbornness faded. She let him hold her hand, though her small lips were still pursed in a pout, as if in silent protest. I know you have some hidden trump cards. Once you use them, you'll definitely be stronger than me. Mu Chen's voice was soft as he spoke. But I'm sure you also know the consequences of using those cards. Luo Li was stunned for a moment, then she bit her red lips tightly. Mu Chen's intuition was sharp. Though she hadn't spoken about it, he could sense it. She did indeed have some powerful trump cards. However, once used, those cards might alert her grandfather, Luo Heavenly God. After all, she was the heir to the Luo God clan, and Luo Heavenly God would never let her leave the clan without protection. If she activated certain trump cards, it would indicate that she was in danger, something Luo Heavenly God would never want to see. Thus, once those cards were used repeatedly, Luo Heavenly God would likely intervene, pulling Luo Li back into the Luo God clan. If that happened, Mu Chen and Luo Li would be separated much sooner than expected. Mu Chen treasured the time he had with Luo Li and didn't want to see such a thing happen. That was why he tried his best to ensure Luo Li's safety. The so-called dangers and battles, he was willing to shoulder them all. I just want to be with you for a little longer, so don't blame me for being selfish in protecting you. Mu Chen gently tightened his grip on Luo Li's slender hand. His words were like a soft breeze, seeping into her heart, calming the resentment she felt. Luo Li gently nodded, and a faint smile appeared on her delicate face, so pure and beautiful that it was breathtaking. Don't worry, I won't push myself too hard. If it really gets too difficult, I'll let you step in. How does that sound? Mu Chen smiled slightly. Luo Li nodded obediently. Do you really have a way to deal with the devil dragon child? Li Xiantong sighed and asked. I'll try my best, Mu Chen nodded, his black eyes growing cold as he stared at the devil dragon child in the distance. But I'll need you to buy me some time. Okay. Li Xiantong agreed without hesitation. Mu Chen took a deep breath, and without saying more, he slowly closed his eyes, which startled many onlookers. Was Mu Chen about to prepare another powerful spiritual array? But why couldn't they sense any fluctuations from it? Pretending to be mysterious. From a distance, the demon dragon child, seeing this, narrowed his eyes. He had begun to grow wary of Mu Chen's ever-changing methods. He would not give him any chance to turn the tables. After all, he was putting everything he had into this fight, and even if he won, it would come at an enormous cost. He could not afford any more unexpected turns. Swish! The demon dragon child clenched his palms, and a massive surge of spiritual power swept through the sky. His figure moved in an instant, charging straight at Mu Chen. Seeing this, Li Xiantong immediately rushed out, pushing his spiritual power to its limits as he directed it toward the demon dragon child. Get lost. However, the demon dragon child sneered at the obstruction and threw a punch. There was nothing fancy about it, just a brutal, overwhelming surge of spiritual power that could tear through anything in its path. Boom. The two colossal spiritual forces collided with a thunderous sound. Li Xuantong's body shook violently and was sent flying backward. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. Only after personally facing the demon dragon child's power could one truly comprehend how terrifying he was. Boom. As Li Xiantong was sent flying, a sharp sword energy slashed down from the sky, heavily impacting the demon dragon child's body. Luoli, wielding a long sword, flew out and launched a fierce assault. Both of them poured all their power into stalling the demon dragon child. The battle had become incredibly intense, and the spectators held their breath as the fierce struggle unfolded before them. While Li Xiantong and Luoli worked desperately to contain the demon dragon child, within Mu Chen's Qi, the divine soul sitting cross-legged opened its eyes. Then, it moved and flew toward the center of the Qi. There, a dark violet mandala flower bloomed. In its center stood a pitch-black demon pillar, bound by purple chains that sealed it in place. This was the great Xun'er demon pillar that Mu Chen had obtained from the White Dragon's supreme spiritual treasure. However, this object was too vicious. If Mu Chen hadn't had the mysterious black paper suppressing it inside him, he would have long since been consumed by the malevolent force, losing his mind. Since then, he had been hesitant to use it. But now, given the situation, he had no choice. They could never defeat the demon dragon child in this state without unleashing it. Mu Chen raised his head, his gaze sharp as he stared at the great Xun'er demon pillar. His voice was low as he spoke. If you don't want to remain sealed here forever, then cooperate with me. Buzz. As soon as Mu Chen's words fell, the great Xun'er demon pillar erupted with dark light. The malevolent aura rippled outward, as if it were about to engulf Mu Chen. However, before the malevolent aura could spread, the mandala flower exploded in purple light. The dark aura, upon touching the purple glow, quickly melted away, as if it were snow meeting lava. The great Xun'er demon pillar certainly lived up to its name as a malevolent artifact, difficult to tame. You want to invade me? Let's see if you have the ability to do so. Mu Chen's voice was cold as he stepped forward. His divine soul passed into the mandala flower, then he extended a hand to touch the great Xun'er demon pillar. Boom. The moment Mu Chen's divine soul made contact with the pillar, an indescribable wave of malevolent energy surged out, rushing up his arm and flooding his divine soul. Within mere moments, his divine soul was dyed a deep crimson, resembling a blood-red child, exuding a terrifying aura. Mu Chen's eyes shifted between deep crimson and dark black as the overwhelming malevolent force raged within him. It surged like a violent storm, sweeping through his body. This was an extremely powerful force, but it was one that could erode a person's mind and turn them into a bloodthirsty beast. Mu Chen clenched his teeth tightly, resisting the invasion. He knew that in order to control this malevolent force, he had to withstand its corrupting power. The bloodlust surged violently within Mu Chen's heart, filling him with an overwhelming urge to kill. His eyes were nearly blood-red. However, at that moment, the mysterious black paper beneath the mandala flower began to emit a faint, unusual glow. The mandala flower stretched its beautiful petals and enveloped Mu Chen's divine soul within. A cool sensation spread through him, slowly suppressing the violent murderous intent in his heart. Mu Chen's eyes suddenly widened. His pupils, surrounded by a blood-red hue, remained pitch black and clear. He slowly opened his hands, and an overwhelming blood-red power surged out, sweeping across the sky like a tidal wave, finally pouring into his limbs and bones. High above the skies of Western Desolation City, Mu Chen's tightly shut eyes suddenly snapped open. Everyone could feel the temperature in the world drop at that very moment. Boom! Li Xiantong was surrounded by a vast spiritual power, his fists howling through the air, carrying spiritual energy lashing out in multiple strikes at the oncoming Devil Dragon Child. However, the Devil Dragon Child practically flew straight through, the blood-red scales on his body flashing with a chilling gleam. He slapped out with his palm, and a torrent of spiritual energy swept out, directly shattering the many energy lashes. Unaware of death. After shattering Li Xuantong's energy lashes, the Devil Dragon Child's eyes filled with killing intent. Li Xuantong's interference had become a nuisance to him. He immediately took a step forward, his figure appearing like a phantom behind Li Xiantong, and a single palm struck out at his back, aiming for a lethal blow. The spiritual energy fluctuations from behind made Li Xuantong's expression change. But he was no fool. A cold glint flashed in his eyes, and a long sword appeared in his hand. Without hesitation, he swung the sword back toward the Devil Dragon Child's throat, intending to strike back with his life on the line. Humph! The Devil Dragon Child snorted coldly. He reached out with one hand and grabbed the incoming sword tip. The sharp sword energy sliced through his blood-red scales, creating a harsh, piercing sound. Though it left bloodstains in his palm, it was ultimately stopped. Swish! Just as the Devil Dragon Child blocked Li Xuantong's sword energy and was about to take another shot at his life, a sharp, piercing sound rang out from behind him. A sword light, like a shooting star, was heading straight for his back. The sword light made the Devil Dragon Child's scales tighten. He felt a sense of threat, one that was far more dangerous than anything Li Xiantong could pose. A flash of light appeared in his eyes, and he immediately decided to abandon Li Xiantong, recognizing that the attack from behind was the bigger threat. However, as he turned, Li Xiantong advanced swiftly, grabbing his arm and locking it in place, paying no mind to the deadly nature of his move. You! The Devil Dragon Child's gaze turned cold. Li Xiantong was ruthless, clearly intending to use himself as bait to let the rear attack strike. The Devil Dragon Child sneered. His body shook, and the blood-red scales erupted with a dazzling light. A powerful force exploded outward, like layers of blood-colored waves. Boom! Li Xiantong was instantly blasted away, spitting out blood. The sword light that had been closing in was also shattered by the blood waves. Luo Li staggered back several steps, her internal energy surging as her delicate face turned pale. High in the sky, the Devil Dragon Child stood arrogantly. He looked down at the somewhat disheveled Li Xiantong and Luo Li, his eyes growing more vicious. He clenched his palms, and the scales on his body darkened. The murderous aura around him grew denser. If you want to fight me to a mutual destruction, you're not worthy. Li Xuantong's face was ashen, his spiritual energy in disarray. He had been injured in his earlier battle with Gue Xiong and now, fighting with his life on the line. The wounds were only worsening. Luo Li was in slightly better condition, but not by much. Mu Chun had not wanted her to use any trump cards, so she could only rely on the deadly sharpness of the Luo Godsword to threaten the Devil Dragon Child. But it was clear to everyone that at this rate, neither of them would last much longer. It seems I'll have to kill one of you first. The Devil Dragon Child sneered and locked onto the injured Li Xiantong, stepping forward to claim his life. Boom! However, just as the Devil Dragon Child prepared to strike, an overwhelming surge of malevolent energy erupted into the sky. In an instant, it filled the entire area. This malevolent aura was far more oppressive than the one emanating from the Devil Dragon Child's body. Even the man in the blue robe, standing at the Grand Hall, slightly changed his expression and shifted his gaze. Then, they saw Mu Chun, standing in midair far in the sky. At this moment, the young man opened his tightly closed eyes. His black pupils were tinged with a crimson hue, radiating with an aura of slaughter. However, deep within his eyes, there was still a trace of clarity, indicating that he maintained his rationality and had not been entirely consumed by that terrifying malevolent force. Such overwhelming malevolent force. It's even stronger than the killing chi of the Devil Dragon Child. Who exactly is this Mu Chun? The man in the blue robe's expression grew serious. He could feel the malevolent force around Mu Chen's body, which was enough to make even him feel uneasy. The Devil Dragon Child's expression also drastically changed. He stared at Mu Chen, whose body was radiating a blood-red malevolent force, his eyes filled with disbelief. Because from the malevolent force emanating from Mu Chen's body, he sensed something familiar. It was similar to the killing chi they cultivated in the Dragon Demon Palace, but far more ruthless and domineering. Who the hell is this bastard? The Devil Dragon Child's mind was shaken. This malevolent force was definitely not something Mu Chen had cultivated. Before you kill him, I will deal with you first. The blood-red malevolent force enveloped Mu Chen, and it made his previously handsome face appear somewhat terrifying, as if he would transform into a god of slaughter and unleash a massacre at any moment. Arrogant. The Devil Dragon Child gritted his teeth. Mu Chen's transformation made him feel immense unease, yet his mouth still curled into a cold sneer. Mu Chen's crimson eyes locked onto the Devil Dragon Child. The malevolent force coursed beneath his skin, spreading through his limbs and bones. This foreign power caused him some discomfort. However, fortunately, he was much stronger now than when he was at White Dragon Hill, so he didn't suffer as terribly from this malevolent force as he did last time. The Devil Dragon Child also fixed his gaze on Mu Chen. Their eyes crossed in midair, both filled with undisguised cold-killing intent. I'll slaughter you first. The Devil Dragon Child's expression turned exceptionally grim. He took a step forward, and with an explosive burst of air, his figure vanished. When he reappeared, he was already behind Mu Chen, his claw-like hand ruthlessly slamming toward Mu Chen's head. Boom! An unmatched and domineering malevolent force erupted from Mu Chen's body. His 5 fingers clenched into a fist and he swung it out, blood surging like a sea, hitting the Devil Dragon Child before he could land his strike. The wind from Mu Chen's fist hit the Devil Dragon Child's chest. The terrifying force erupted under Mu Chen's palm, causing visible blood waves to spread. Boom! A deep, resonating sound rang out, and everyone's pupils shrank in shock as they saw the seemingly unstoppable Devil Dragon Child sent flying hundreds of yards by a single palm from Mu Chen. The blood-red scales on his chest cracked, and blood seeped out, sliding down the broken scales. The entire city erupted in astonished gasps. This change had been so swift that no one had expected it. Just moments ago, Mu Chen had been completely suppressed by the Devil Dragon Child, unable to fight back. Now, Mu Chen had overwhelming knocked him back. That was a late heaven-reaching stage expert. Su Xian and the others were stunned, unable to process what had just happened. They couldn't understand why Mu Chen's strength had suddenly surged to such an extent. Was it due to the malevolent force? In the sky, Luoli and Li Xiantong were also taken aback. Luoli wasn't particularly surprised, as she always had inexplicable confidence in Mu Chen. As for Li Xiantong, his expression was a mixture of astonishment and complexity. The new student he once thought nothing of had, in just 1 year, grown to the point where he could surpass him. Far in the distance, the Devil Dragon Child, with an extremely ugly expression, steadied himself. He looked at the shattered scales on his chest, his eyes momentarily filled with disbelief. Had Mu Chen actually injured him with a single palm? He, a late heaven transformation stage expert, had been injured by a kid in the late heaven transformation stage? The Devil Dragon Child's face twisted in fury. In the next instant, he roared, and his blood-colored scales erupted in bloodlight once again. He couldn't believe it. After activating the Dragon Transformation Blood Art, he was still defeated by a freshman from Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Boom, boom. The two collided, and waves of terrifying malevolent force surged like a tidal wave. The overwhelming spiritual energy shockwaves spread out, making the onlookers feel their scalp tingling. Mu Chen's expression was cold, his eyes bloodshot. As their figures intertwined, he threw a punch with ferocity, like a thunderbolt, carrying with it an immense malevolent force, crashing into the Devil Dragon Child's palm strike. Boom! A massive blood wave, hundreds of zhang in size, erupted from behind the two, shooting into the sky with a terrifying force. Both bodies shook, and they were blasted thousands of meters away. However, the devil dragon child's expression grew increasingly grim. His hand trembled uncontrollably, with scales shattering and blood flowing out. His malevolent aura was nowhere near as powerful as Mu Chen's. When their forces collided, the malevolent force instantly began to corrode his aura, flooding into his body and causing his insides to churn violently. He could faintly sense that his energy was gradually depleting. This was the aftereffect of the dragon transformation blood art. If he didn't end the battle soon, he would be killed by Mu Chen. I refuse to believe that I can't kill a freshman from Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. The devil dragon child's eyes were filled with madness as layers of fury built up. In the next moment, he roared loudly, formed seals with both hands, and a beam of light shot from his forehead into the sky, transforming into a massive black heavy sword. The sword hummed as spiritual energy swept out, and it grew rapidly in the wind, soon reaching a size of 100 zhong. A terrifying sword aura spread out. The blood-colored scales on his body shot out, forming a blood wave that wrapped around the sword, resembling a blood-colored demon dragon, releasing horrifying fluctuations. Dragon Demon Divine Art, Dragon Breaker Slash. The devil dragon child roared, stepping forward. The black heavy sword shot out like a comet, and with a blood dragon's roar, it slashed downward as though it could tear apart the very heavens, heading straight for Mu Chen. One strike to sever the heavens. The devil dragon child was going all out in a final desperate struggle. Desperate now? Fine, I'll join you. Let's see who can subdue whom. Mu Chen raised his head, his bloodshot eyes locked on the terrifying attack. A low growl rumbled from his throat, echoing through the heavens and earth. Meanwhile, in his chi-si, the dark purple mandala flower began to slowly bloom. As the petals opened, the great Xun'er demon pillar sealed within surged with an earth-shattering malevolent force. Boom! The malevolent force erupted from Mu Chen's head, shooting into the sky, and behind him, it transformed into a massive black demon pillar, about 1,000 zhong tall, standing tall between heaven and earth. The entire world seemed to darken in that instant.